for Session 7, a presentation titled Tagore, Shantiniketan, and Indonesian Batik by Dr. Maria Wronska-Friend, scholar based in Australia.
I'll put my clock. Yes, but I'll have to look that way. Yeah, okay. Yes, thank you. Oh no, I won't need it. No, no, it will be disturbing. No. Yeah, we've got it. Thank you very much for inviting me to this fascinating symposium. Truly, it is fascinating. I'm very much interested in textile traditions of Bengal, and this is my third visit to Kolkata, so I think this is a proof of it. And I'm very grateful that I was given the opportunity to meet so many interesting people here in recent days, and also it gave me opportunity to learn so many new things about textiles of Bengal. Also, the exhibition is absolutely stunning, so thank you very much for all of that, and my congratulations. I'm Maria Wronska-Friend, and in case you wonder about my accent, well, I was born and brought up in Poland, in the city of Łódź, which used to be known as the Polish Manchester. And in the past, there used to be a huge textile industry in that city. And this probably explains my fascination with textiles of the world. But although I was brought up in Poland, the last 30 years I've been living in Australia, and I'm associated with James Cook University in Cairns. The focus of my research are Indonesian textiles, especially Batik of Java. In particular, I'm interested in tracing connections between Batik of Java and textile traditions in other parts of the world. So, for example, I'm interested in the introduction of a batik technique to Europe, which took place in the end of the 19th century. Also in connections between batik of Java and textiles in Japan as well as West Africa. And at one stage I became aware that the batik of Java also influenced to some degree textile traditions of Bengal, and that's why I'm here. The person who initiated the process of introducing batik to Bengal was no less than Rabindranath Tagore, and that was the outcome of his visit to Indonesia in 1927. I think that here in Kolkata, there is no need to explain who was Rabindranath Tagore. I only will remind that Tagore was the first person from Asia who in 1913 received the Nobel Prize in Literature. And soon after, his poems and stories started to be translated into a number of languages across the whole world, including Polish language. And in Poland, in several cities, including my hometown of Łódź, there are streets named after Tagore. He's quite a famous person. This is the proof of it. And in my research, I used diverse resources. Among them, important are two archives. The first one is the archive of Rabindra Brahmana in Shantiniketan, because this is where there are letters of Tagore and photographs from his visit to Indonesia. But the other one is Arnold Bakker archive at the Leiden University. because Baker also accompanied Tagore on this trip to Indonesia. He was a Dutch ethnomusicologist who also spent some time at Shantiniketan. And during my studies in Leiden, it was quite pleasant. It was a nice surprise to find that at the university gardens there was a bust of Tagore, because also there he's quite a well-known and respected person. But perhaps before we discuss Batik at Shantiniketan, first of all, it is worth to look at the Batik technique as such. Batik, in principle, is a technique of resist dyeing, in which wax, liquid wax, is applied to the surface of a cloth. The wax hardens and creates a protective layer that stops the dye from penetrating the cloth, so the wax is the resist. And as a result, on the completion of dyeing and after the wax is removed, white lines appear, or white areas, in those places that previously were covered by wax. Wax resist dyeing has been practiced in several parts of the world, but there's no doubt that this technique has been brought to the highest level of accomplishment on the Indonesian island of Java. And for this reason, the Javanese word batik that describes this technique became synonymous with wax resist dyeing and is used quite frequently also here in Bengal. And I wish to draw your attention to this small pen-like tool, which is called chanting. It is used to apply wax to the cloth, and this is a Javanese invention. It is quite a simple tool, but it allows the drawing of very small, quite precise wax designs, which are so characteristic for this elaborate and very controlled style of Javanese batiks, which we will see soon. Batik is quite an old method of textile decoration. It was certainly known in the antiquity, and the oldest known batik cloth has been dated to the 4th century BC. There is no doubt that India was the oldest or one of the oldest centers of batik production, although due to climatic conditions, those fabrics are known mainly from Egypt, where they were traded to, and the groundbreaking research on the Gujarati textiles traded to Egypt have been conducted by Dr. Ruth Barnes, who is one of the guests of this symposium here. Here is an example of such an early wax-resist dyed cloth or batik. This is a tent hanging from Gujarat, which was found in Egypt, and it's dated 10th to the 15th century. This very fine, irregular veining testifies that wax was used as a resist. In Gujarat, there is also clay resist used, known as dabu, but clay never breaks in such a way, quite differently. It gives different effects. So there's no doubt that those very fine, irregular veining, this veining is typical for wax resist. Another group of textiles that where wax resist was used in their production are kalamkari fabrics from Tamil Nadu. In this example that you see here, it is a very fine example of this technique. The wax was applied with kalam and with a brush. You have to imagine the wax covered the whole background of this cloth and those areas which have been dyed red. And only those areas that had to be dyed in indigo, they've been left uncovered. And there's no cracking of this wax, no veining. This is extremely fine work that testifies to the great skill in working with this resist. Because wax, you can crack deliberately the layer of wax, and you have that veining. Sometimes it happens in a spontaneous way during the dyeing process, but sometimes artists prefer to avoid that cracking effect at all, and this is this example. So the question is, what about Bengal? Was the wax resist used here in the decoration of textiles or not? And it seems that it was done only occasionally. And simply wax resist dyeing in Bengal was practiced only sporadically, and this is such an example. I'm grateful here to Mrs. Avalon Forfringham for drawing my attention to this example. You also saw it yesterday in her presentation. This is a series of bandana handkerchiefs, and the wax resist was applied here with blocks. So wax resist dyeing was never popular in Bengal until this technique was introduced from Indonesia and supported by Tagore. At least it was never popular to such extent as it was in other parts of India, where it used to be practiced on the large scale. And at the beginning of this research, I thought that by introducing the technique of batik to India, perhaps from Indonesia to India, perhaps Tagore wanted to revive this ancient tradition of wax resist dyeing. However, as my research progressed, I became aware that there were other factors that were instrumental for the introduction of batik to Bengal, and quite soon I will talk about them. Well, first of all, a little bit information about Shantiniketan. This is the place where Tagore spent most of his life. Tagore was very critical of a system of colonial education based on the British tradition, and he experienced that system in his youth. And therefore, at his family estate at Shantiniketan, at the beginning of the 20th century, he decided to set up a progressive, experimental school. It was kind of a seat of learning. Initially, it was a school which grew into a college, and nowadays known as Vishva Bharati. It is one of the most prominent universities of India. The name Tagore gave to this school was Vishva Bharati. This is Sanskrit name, which translates as the union of the world with India. So we can see that connection was important, India and the world, the universe. And the motto of Vishva Bharati reads, "As the place where the world makes a home in a single nest." Tagore was very keen on developing Shantiniketan as a center for exchange of ideas and collaboration. The place was frequented by scholars and artists from all over the world and also from other parts of India. And according to Tagore's worldview, art and culture play a very important role in mediating relations between societies and different groups of people. And for that reason, at Shantiniketan, it was a gathering of the place, this nest where people came together. It was Shantiniketan gathered artists, scholars, intellectuals from various countries of Europe, but also from China, Japan, and following Tagore's visit to Indonesia, after 1907, there was also a number of Indonesian artists and writers, painters who were frequent guests at Shantiniketan. Indonesia was a country of particular interest for Tagore because India and Indonesia, for more than 1,000 years, maintained very close religious and cultural ties. All major religions of India, Buddhism, Hinduism, they've been introduced to Java, Sumatra, Bali, and also Indian art, literature, Mahabharata, Ramayana, Indian script, Devanagari became basis for a number of local scripts in Indonesia. So all of them, became very important components of Indonesian culture. And for that reason, Tagore was very curious to visit the place. Such an opportunity came in 1927 when he was invited to visit Indonesia. And as you can see in the telegram sent to a British consul in Batavia, Tagore stated his wish to visit Java for studying Hindu influence in Javanese religion, arts, and music. His hosts on this visit, it was the organization Kunstkring, or Art Circle, Dutch organization, Art Society, we could say, and also Java Institute. They prepared a special program for Tagore's visit to Indonesia, and in total he spent 5 weeks visiting a number of places in Bali and in Java. On Bali, which is the major island of Indonesia where Hinduism traditions are still alive, Tagore spent 2 weeks. He usually stayed at residences of local rulers, and frequently he was given local textiles or shadow theater puppets as gifts. And some of them have been donated on return to Shantiniketan Museum, but some of them, like this show, they stayed in Tagore's private collection. Obviously, he couldn't part. In Java, Tagore spent 3 weeks, and here he visited sites of ancient monuments built in Java during the period of Indian influence, such as the Buddhist temple of Borobudur, which is built in the shape of mandala, and the Hinduist temple Prambanan, that was built also in central Java just a century later. He was very much interested in those ancient traditions, but he was also interested in the living traditions of Java. He met not only artists, but even he met a young activist, at that time young activist, Sukarno. But in principle, he was interested more in cultural traditions. And in recognition of his status in Surakarta, he stayed at the palace of Mangkunegoro VII, one in Yogyakarta at the palace of Paku Alam VII. So at both palaces, the hosts organized for him presentations of shadow theater, wayang, court dances, as well as, at least on 2 occasions, Tagore witnessed Batik demonstrations. He received also several gifts of high-quality batiks given to him by the local rulers. And in one of his letters, sent from Java to Shantiniketan, he described this event in the following way. That was in a palace. On a table, there were clothes ornamented with batik work. I was asked to select 3 of them, and the rest of the party 1 each, as mementos. It takes 2 to 3 months to make those decorations, and the maids of a household being adept in the art of batik. During his visit to Java, Tagore decided to introduce batik technique to the curriculum of Kala Bhavana, that was the art college at Shantiniketan. And he encouraged Surendranath Kar, one of his companions on this trip, to take practical classes in batik making. And those are the samples where Surendranath Kar learned his batiks. They are in the collection of the Nanda Museum at Shantiniketan. Surendranath Kar described this event in the following way. I found the Java art of batik very attractive. I realized the effectiveness of its use in clothes for men and women, in interior decoration, in stage decor, and thereafter, during the tour, I tried to master this craft. On my return, to Shantiniketan, I was able to introduce batik technique to Kalabhavana. Here, as you can see, so those are those teaching samples. They feature typical motifs of Central Java batik, swings of Garuda, small pavilions, mountain ranges. They are in principle known as Semen design. As regards Javanese batiks brought to Shantiniketan from this trip to Java, some of them were personal gifts given to Tagore, as we heard already, while others fabrics have been purchased in shops and markets for the museum collection. I researched those Javanese batiks at the Nandan Museum at Shantiniketan. They are approximately Javanese batiks, and they are of a high but also of average collection because they were used in a practical way at Shantiniketan. They were sometimes used in dance dramas created Tagore. I'll talk about it. So they rather aimed at the medium quality of those fabrics for those performances. But here in Tagore residence, in his private space, we can see that there was also batik used to decorate the interior. There are at least two Javanese batiks that cover the couch, and one of them is similar to one of the museums one of the batiks in museum collections, which I placed in the lower corner. The name of this diagonal pattern is Lereng. So it indicates that batik, that Tagore also was keen on batik aesthetics, and he used them in his private space. So, following Tagore's visit to Indonesia, the technique of batik was introduced to the curriculum of Kalabhavana, the Institute of Fine Arts at Shantiniketan, which was established in 1919. The first principal was Nandalal Bose, and he was instrumental in implementing Tagore's vision of art education there. As I mentioned, Tagore favored an informal, rather non-structural approach to education, and it was based on the principles of Indian ashram teaching rather than the rigid Western system. And important principle of those programs was to overcome the Western division which segregated arts from crafts. So besides painting and sculpture, the students were encouraged to learn woodblock printing, embroidery, also leather decoration and lacquerwork, as well as batik. Batik featured there as well. And Nandalal Bose, he learned himself batik technique, and one of his batiks is actually on page 211 in this recently published book, Textiles of Bengal. So you can see his batik over there. But also two of his daughters, I'll present them in a moment, they were also very active in practicing batik. So in the 1930s, batik technique was well established in Shantiniketan, and it was practiced at Kalabhavana, but also one of the major proponents of this technique was Pratima Devi. It was Rabindranath Tagore's daughter-in-law. And actually what is interesting, Pratima learned batik in Paris during the visit of Tagore and his family to Paris in 1924. In the 1920s, the technique of batik was very popular in Europe, practiced a number of people. So during the longest stay in Paris, that's when Pratima learned this technique. And on return to batik, she already practiced this technique, but only on a small scale. It was not introduced to Kalabhavana. So Tagore certainly became aware of batik during his visit in Paris, but there is no doubt that his visit to Java was decisive for the introduction of batik technique to Shantiniketan. So, in a short time, since its introduction to Shantiniketan, the Javanese technique started to undergo process of transformation and adaptation. And within few decades, it became a distinctive Bengali textile technique. Well, there were several reasons why this technique had to be modified. First of all, there was quite different size of fabrics that were batik on Java and in Bengal. In Indonesia, the batik is usually worn as a wrapped around skirt, kain panjang. It's usually just over 2 meters long, but saris, batik saris, well, they were twice that long, over 5 meters. So the surface layout, the composition has changed, also the method of surface decoration. So in sari, motifs usually are applied only to those parts which are most visible when they are worn, those most visible sections. However, in Indonesia, the whole cloth is decorated in a uniform way. So, and in sari, this part, which is not visible, is usually covered with a layer of wax and paraffin, which are cracked, and that results in this characteristic veining effect. Still, you can imagine how many kilograms of wax are necessary to decorate one sari. And also, if you recall on Java, the wax is applied with a small wax tool known as chanting, which allows to create narrow and very controlled, consistent lines. Well, this has been changed at Shantiniketan because Indian artists decided that a brush would be a more effective tool to apply wax. And the use of brush has resulted in the development of a quite different style of decoration. While the motifs of Javanese batiks are usually drawn in a very exact, detailed manner, the Indian motifs are drawn in a more spontaneous way, closely resembling the process of painting. So in principle, the general composition has changed, and so the composition has changed, the technique has changed, and also the motifs which are used in Shantiniketan batiks are different from the Javanese one. Because those used in Shantiniketan batiks, they were developed by Nandalal Bose, and also they are result of Tagore's views on aesthetics and his art philosophy. In principle, the Shantiniketan style reflected the spiritual relationship and harmony between humans and nature. Therefore, typical for Shantiniketan batiks are floral motifs such as hibiscus or lotus flowers, and they are accompanied by birds, fish, small animals, and they are usually presented in a harmonious, well-balanced composition. Here we see batiks which were made by Gauri Banja. She was a daughter of Nandalal Bose, and she was one of the teachers at Kalabhavana. This is a Mrs. Suleika Bhattacharya. I had the pleasure to meet her during my first visit to Shantiniketan in 2011. She graduated from Kalabhavana, specializing in batik, in 1954. And at the time when I met her, she was 84 years old, but she was still making batiks in this traditional classic style of Kalabhavana. And because there is a huge demand on those batik saris, they are usually made of silk, I was desperate to buy one, but there were none available, so I placed an order. And I thought that the price that she asked was actually too low for such a stunning cloth. So I paid more than she requested. And I was quite surprised when 8 months later I received a parcel, and it contained not one but 2 saris in beautiful Shantiniketan style, and I will show you them in the moment. This is one of those stories. That was made by 84 years old, yes, Suleika Bhattacharya. And this is this classic style developed at Kalabhavana. This design, this sari replicates the design of Jamuna Sen, who was another daughter of Nandalal Bose and a teacher at Kalabhavana. So as you can see, Achal was the focal point of this decoration with those 2 pair of peacocks, and that was a sari on silk. And this is Achal of a second sari which I received as a gift, because as I said, I ordered one, but I received 2 due to generosity of Mrs. Bhattacharya. And this also is, this is another sari composition, originally designed by Jamuna Sen, and Mrs. Bhattacharya replicated that composition. It is interesting because only members, graduates of Kalabhavana and members of organization Karu Sangha, they have a right to reproduce those patterns. So they're like copyrights over those designs. And usually the creator of those designs, here Jamuna Sen, they are acknowledged on this cloth. Mrs. Suleika was, when she completed this sari, she was 85 years old. And unfortunately, 1 year later, she passed away. And nowadays, there are very few artists at Shantiniketan who can make saris of such high quality. But what is interesting, when you look at this design of this sari, the style of decoration, well, it is very soft. The wax was applied with a brush, and it has such soft fluid lines. We can see a great similarity between the style of Shantiniketan Batik and the art of Alpana. Alpana is Bengali folk art. Those are decorations painted with rice flour on floors or walls on religious occasions. And here we can see the great similarities between those 2 art forms. Batiks on the left, those are batiks from the collection of Nandan Museum, and some examples of Alpana. So over the time, the batik technique and batik decoration was receiving at Shantiniketan more and more local features. But just for one moment, let's return to Batik of Java and all that collection that was brought by Tagore. Following his visit to Indonesia, I mentioned that in Shantiniketan, in the museum, there are around 40 pieces of those Javanese batiks. So did they make any impact on Shantiniketan batik? Well, a vast majority of those batiks, of Javanese batiks, almost 90% are from Central Java. Those are blue-brown batiks with motifs which are either abstract or floral, small floral motifs. And those batiks, they were used as a teaching aid at Shantiniketan. And although in the program of Kalabhavana strongly encourage personal development, personal expression, however, one of the assignments requested students to make a batik cloth in Javanese style, so that they would understand better the principles of Javanese batik technique. And those fabrics were used for those assignments. At the same time, please pay attention to this fabric on the left with this white field. This is Kanban cloth, breast cover, and a similar cloth I'll point in a moment on another slide. And here, Shantiniketan interpretation of some of the Javanese motifs. Those are all batiks that were created at Kalabavana. So you can see here the triangle motif, known in Indonesia as tumpal, the rhomboid filled with kite, popular, also intersecting circles. This is a very popular motif on Javanese batik known as kawung. However, we could question whether it is truly Javanese, because we know examples from India of this motif going back to Mohenjo-Daro. So, but anyhow, when it appears so close, I think it might be related to batik influence. So what is the situation of batik today at Shantiniketan? Well, batik is still part of a curriculum of Kalabavana, but as an art form, it is losing its significance and importance that it enjoyed in previous years. However, there is still a group of people who produce batik of a high quality, similar to those examples that I presented previously that were made by Mrs. Bhattacharya. Those are graduates of Kalabavana, and already in the 1930s, students who graduated from Kalabavana, they organized a group known as Karusanga. This is like a business arm of Kalabavana. They continue producing high-quality batiks and other objects here with designs which they learned during their education at this college. Until today, they meet in this mud hut, which is built around a palm tree. And this is actually a heritage-listed building due to the significance of Karusanga of this group. Nowadays, however, this group is quite small. Those are mainly octogenarian ladies, and they meet once or twice a week to dye fabrics. There are not many new members, so I'm not sure what will be the future of this group. Here, this is the courtyard where the dyeing takes place, and the dyeing of sari, of course, requires special vats different from Indonesian batiks, which are much shorter. And inside it is possible to do some waxing. However, what I've noticed at Karusanga, as regards dyes, they use, well, at least last time I visited them in 2016, they used naphthol dyes, and those dyes have been banned in many other countries. So I hope that here they were already changed or will be changed. Also, members of Karusanga produced beautiful wedding saris. This is one of the trademarks. This is like a special line of production. The first sari on the left was made by Mrs. Suleika Bhattacharya. That was a wedding for her daughter. This is this lady who gave me those two saris in place of one, and this is the wedding sari that she made for her daughter. This is on the left. And the second sari, it is presented here by Mrs. Rebasom. It was made in 1971 by her mother-in-law, Kanasom, who was a student of Pratima Devi, and she learned batik at Shantiniketan. That was a wedding gift for Mrs. Rebasom. And this sari features quite unusual pink color, which represents an important stage of wedding ceremony. The bride foot is painted with red pigment, and on entering husband's home, she drops her foot into a bowl of milk. And that's how this pink color emerges. Yes, I think you know that, certainly better than I do. And this pink color on this sari represents this important moment. So they are really stunning pieces. I've mentioned that Tagore was highly impressed with Javanese dances, which he witnessed at the palaces in Surakarta. He really appreciated the the grace and refinement of the movement of those dances. And on return to Shantiniketan, Javanese dances were introduced to the curriculum of the school. And in the following years, there were frequent dance teachers coming from Java to instruct Shantiniketan students in Javanese dances, and also there were some Bengali students and teachers who went to Java to learn those dances. It was one of the favorite aspects of Tagore's Javanese culture enjoyed by Tagore. And here we can see Javanese dances which are performed in front of Tagore's home on the occasion of his birthday. As I understand, that was his last birthday. And the dancers wear batik costumes made of Javanese batiks. You can compare those dances at Shantiniketan with dances which I recorded at the Palace of Yogyakarta in central Java. They are quite similar. Well, one photo is black and white, but as regards the movements and dresses are similar. Tagore admired the simplicity of Javanese dress, and on one occasion he stated, "I have never seen such elegance of costume, devoid of all unnecessary superfluity." So batik was present not only at Kalabhavana, but also in the private space of Tagore. Tagore was passionate about dance and music. As you know, he composed a number of songs and also composed several dance dramas. Pardon? In 5 minutes, okay. And those 5 dance dramas, they were performed across India and Sri Lanka. And you can see that batik fabrics, they were used as a stage props and also as costume. And this is Jamuna Sen, you can see it. This is this lady who designed those very special batiks. And those batik costumes are also important part of performance. This was a concert of Tagore's songs and music, which was performed here in Calcutta in 2011. It was on the occasion of 150th birthday anniversary of Tagore, and that was part of a program, Tagore Travel and Textiles, organized by Sutra and Mrs. Anita Mukherjee. So another legacy of Tagore's visit to Indonesia was the creation of a series of secular festivals that were inspired by ceremonies and rituals that he witnessed in Bali. And the main aim of those festivals was to strengthen the spiritual link between humans and nature by celebrating the seasons and agrarian duties. And this is one of such ceremonies, Plowing the Fields Festival at Shantiniketan. And you can see that batik stalls are important accessories here of those celebrations. And more than that, even animals on that occasion are dressed with batik attire. And here this is a cow that wears batik with lotus flowers. I'll finish soon. So far I presented batiks that have been associated with Kalabhavana, the fine arts organization at Vishva Bharati University. But there was also another stream of batiks created at the organization known as Shilpa Sadhana Institute of Rural Regeneration. It was set up in 1928 at Sriniketan, near Shantiniketan. And the aim of Shilpa Sadhana was to revive village crafts and to empower socially and economically village artisans. And batik was one of several crafts that was introduced there. And it is still practiced and taught until today. The batiks are usually here made not on silk, on cotton. Also, batik leather is decorated with batik technique. And indeed, what is very important of this organization, Shilpa Sadhana, that a number of women from lower economic background, or like here, Mrs. Sumati Bistra, who is from the Tribal Sandal Society, they learned the Batik technique, and she learned that in 1980s, and it provided her with financial and economic independence. She also taught other women. So this is one of the saris that she made. She learned that at Shilpa Sadhana. And this is another example, Mrs. Kanan Bhattacharya, whom you saw only 2 days ago when she was receiving her award. She also learned Batik at Shilpa Sadhana. And this is one of her saris, and she is there with her granddaughter. She also taught her granddaughter Batik, so she also can earn money and be independent. A number of Shilpa Sadhana graduates, they work in Batik industry around Shantiniketan. This is an example of a Batik that was produced at Bolpur. Batik has been introduced to everyday life at Shantiniketan. You see here a student with a Batik scarf. Also in a village near Shantiniketan, Batik quilt is used, so it's quite interesting. But Batik was also introduced to Calcutta fashion, although it is, as you can see, completely different style from the one developed at Shantiniketan. Different colors are used, different technique. This technique would be known on Java as choletan, where some of the colors are painted directly on a cloth rather than being dyed by immersion. And this is a very special photo. This is the last slide. This is Mrs. Sangeeta Dudoria, who is here, and this is her Batik sari, which is quite amazing because this is handmade Batik, but it is made in the style of Dobu textiles, which are hand-printed textiles of Rajasthan. So hand technique imitates block printing, quite unusual. This is Mrs. Sangeeta Dudoria, who is here with us today. Well, the question about the legacy of Batik and Tagore's ideas regarding collaboration with Indonesia. In 2019, during 2016, during my work at Shantiniketan, we were visited by Mr. Pranoto, who was the first secretary of the Indonesian embassy, and he met, here you can see Mr. Shushobhan Adinkare, who is the head of a museum at that time, and the late Mrs. Supriya Roy, who is a graduate, who is a great connoisseur of Tagore. And there were discussions about the possibility of renewing those links between Shantiniketan and Java once again. And following that, a group of academics from Shantiniketan, they've been invited to Indonesia. They went on a trip. I don't know what are the outcomes of it, whether there are long-lasting effects or not, because after that we had COVID and things became a little bit complicated. But let's hope that it would be possible to renew it. Well, in my quest to learn about Tagore's engagement with Batik and to learn about the legacy of this encounter, I was assisted by a number of people from Calcutta and Shantiniketan, especially by Mrs. Amrita Mukherjee. And here are my acknowledgements and great thanks for their assistance. I continue learning. Thank you so much.